We kind of got two parts today. Lucas is going to cover storm spotting, cloud structure, and then I'm going to go over advanced radar operations, hopefully send you guys home with a little bit more knowledge than you had before. My name is Brandon Redman. I'm a meteorologist. I work at the Darke County Sheriff's Office as the 911 Communications Director. Lucas is a meteorologist as well, both graduates from Ball State, and he is the Delaware County Skywarn Director. Both amateur radio operators here in Delaware County in East Central Indiana. So if you have any questions, it's not formal, stop us. We'll try to answer anything that we can, and I'm going to turn it over to Lucas.
Yeah, definitely don't be shy. Ask any questions, raise your hand. I'll stop at any point. Mine's going to be fairly short. I'm going to go over just kind of some, what spotters are, who they are, what different roles that spotters fill. And I got this from the NWS. Basically, it's kind of a neat little thing that they, well, that's just the title, it should be fine. Basically, I'm going to cover identifying the categories, like I said, the different strengths and weaknesses of the different types of spotters. We're going to go over some of the errors, list why the errors happen, and then we're going to identify different ways to fix those errors, and maybe, some errors are things that just happen to storm spotting. Some errors can be legitimate errors, as we'll see. The biggest part with spotting is radar. Radar and spotters are both very important. Without both, you're not gonna be able to identify storms, identify structures. When you are doing spotting, some people are going to be able to have radar, some people are not. With radar, this is kind of a graph on accuracy. The further away from the radar you get. The closer you are to the radar, the better accuracy of storm spotting, the better accuracy that there is. And obviously in Muncie, we're kind of in that area where we get a lot of, well, when you become perpendicular to the radar, like Muncie is, sometimes when you get the storms moving, you get a lot of errors. And so you have a few more errors. You get all these reports way up here that are just way beyond the trend line here. You still get fairly accurate, but you get a lot more errors. With spotters, they help overcome some of that with the problems that the radar has by confirming some of the structure in real time. So a lot of times you can identify things on a radar like a shelf cloud. Sometimes you can identify rotation. But on a radar, it's not always what it seems. There could be some errors in the radar, as I said, getting further away. There could just be something in that area that's causing radar interference. As Brandon's posted on Facebook here lately, in Wisconsin had some bug problems. Out west, we've had a lot of smoke problems that be showing up on radar. So there's a lot of different things that show up on radar. Traffic shows up on radar in Indianapolis, if you notice, around the 465 loop and going east on 70. So when stuff like that shows up, especially during storms, when you have spotters, they help reduce errors that the radar has. These are kind of the different categories of spotters that are out there. You have your NWS trained spotters, which I'm guessing most people here. How many people have actually been to an NWS spotter training? Yeah, most people here have, and those are going to be the people that are usually reporting the most accurate information to National Weather Service. You also have other experienced spotters that are out there. You have people that are doing research, like Reed Timmer, Tim Samaras, those type SWAT out doing things where they're actual meteorologists. They went to school for it, and that's what they're doing. And then you have the media. The media plays a crucial role. As we'll talk about later, they can also create some errors in their reporting because they have some time crunches. The number one spotter, really, the largest spotter is the general public. The general public actually includes any private citizen, emergency personnel, Those are the people that are always out. You know, those are the people that aren't chasing anything, but those people are reporting what they see right then. You know, a lot of times they also get a lot of delayed reports from those people. That's not always a real time as what the other spotters are. And this goes into talking about the National Weather Service trained and the other spotters, which are usually the most knowledgeable, the most accurate, and they're the most proactive. So they're the ones out following the storms. They usually have radar. They usually have, you know, communication, at least some communication. There's still issues with that when you start reporting. If you're not reporting directly to the National Weather Service, and that's one thing that amateur radio, as we talked about, can help with. It can help with, you know, pulling all the reports into one place and getting them submitted to National Weather Service, as opposed to, you know, you're calling your friend, hey, I got a tornado over here, or, you know, hey, you know, even if it's another weather friend, are you seeing this? Instead of talking about it, you're reporting them directly and getting the information to National Weather Service. And one of the big things the National Weather Service is dealing with right now is a lot of reports that they can't verify, and they can't really look at radar and say, oh, you know, that's what I'm seeing. So when you can get people reporting accurately, that know how to read storms, know how to look at structure, and at the end of this, I'll go through some different clouds and different pictures I found online that look like tornadoes, and they're not. I mean, some of them you can clearly see they're not, but they still look, you know, similar to like a funnel cloud or a tornado. Like I said, the best quality reports come from, you know, most of you guys and, you know, any of the research people that are out. You know, and the errors that happen within this group are errors that just, they happen. You know, sometimes you see something in a heat of the moment, and you maybe report golf ball says, hey, when it's really a little bit smaller than that. Those are the things you have to make sure that you're really verifying. We'll talk about time. That's another thing that needs to be verified. Time can be one of those things that can kind of mess up the NWS with their reporting. Like it says at the bottom, if any problems occur in this group, it's a communication issue. The media has one of the biggest advantages because they are on TV. They can break it at any time. You know, unfortunately, sometimes they break into like Big Brother or shows like that and can upset people and get people really mad. You know, but that's their job. Their job is to break in and let the public know. You know, people get angry about it, but it's part of spotting. It's part of letting the public know. They send people out in the field. They can get real-time cameras. If you get any of you guys watched any of the tornado footage over the summer in the South or in the spring in the South, I mean, they had those tornadoes live going through the cities right there. Well, I mean, you can't get any better spotting than a camera pointed directly towards a tornado going over a metro area. If that doesn't get the word out, nothing will. With that being said, media has a lot of timelines and different things that they're got to go by, and they're trying to report stuff before the other station reports it. So a lot of times you can deal with a lot of errors, and as it says, you know, ratings pressure. You know, that obviously TV anymore, especially TV meteorology, is about ratings. They, you know, this isn't, you know, watching Stan Wood, who used to be on Channel 8 back years ago, stand in front of a teleprompter and point to a couple things. This is, you know, weather nowadays is a moneymaker for those people. When they put weather on TV, people watch. You know, I mean, you get things like, you know, Hurricane Katrina and stuff like that happen, and the tornadoes filmed, you know, for miles and miles and miles, and people watch that stuff. So they are trying to get the best product out, and they're trying to beat the other competition. So from a spotter standpoint, the media is very important, but can have a few issues with, you know, trying to push the line without verifying certain things. So sometimes things can be reported and they may not be happening. The general public, like I said earlier, the biggest strength of the general public is the size. I mean, you have people everywhere. So They can help with verification for after the fact. You know, it's not always reported real time. You have a lot of the public that reports things. You know, they may not notice they have any damage, you know, that night. They may wake up the next morning, go to work, come home from work, and then say, hey, wow, I have a tree down in my backyard. Then they may call it in, and then the National Weather Service is interested. But a lot of these come in, and they're directly impacting that person. They're not out reporting damage, you know, 10 miles down the road from their house. They're reporting things that impact them. They're not reporting other things that are, you know, if a silo gets blown over and a farmer that lives 20 miles away, they're not out looking at that. They're reporting, you know, their garage getting blown down. But the quality can be hampered by they don't know who to call. They, you know, a lot of times the general public calls 911, or general public maybe calls 911, or you know, they stop and they see a policeman on the side of the road. Hey, you know, there's something over there, and the policeman calls, reports it. Then 911 dispatch reports to the EMA then reports to National Weather Service, and then, you know, anybody ever played the telephone game? By the time you get to that end point, you have an F5 tornado rolling through the middle of Muncie when, you know, you had like, you know, maybe a 40 or 50 mile per hour wind gust. So, you know, general public, with them you have to kind of, hopefully you can get other verifications. With National Weather Service, they want all these reports, because if you're getting reports from spotters, reports from researchers, and reports from general public all in the same area and similar reports, that's going to help them verify what's going on. These are going to be some of the biggest error sources. As we talked about earlier, poor observation. You know, you have honest mistakes. You have different people with different knowledge levels. You know, sometimes people can miss the important things. People may not know what to look for. As you can see in the picture over here, it's kind of grainy, but you have things blocking. You have buildings. Depending on the type of terrain you're in, you may have mountains, you may have hills, you may have a forest. You know, there's a lot of factors that go into what you're reporting. And the biggest thing with spotting is people thinking, well, I can't really see over it, but I think this is a tornado. Well, you know, you have to use your judgment. You know, if you can verify radar, and you can maybe verify with someone else on amateur radio that's a different angle from the storm, and you'll hear me touch on amateur radio a lot because it's a big thing when you can, you know, you can have different people from different viewpoints on the storm. You know, and you have Bob down at the south end, you know, Tom at the north end, and somebody on the west, you know, different spots. You can verify more what is going on with that storm. The biggest problem we have is people not being able to see directly at the storm, and especially at night. I mean, night spotting is very dangerous for one thing, but all you get is lightning flashes, and that's your only hope, and that's for a split second. And if you're reporting things at night, or you're reporting things during the day that aren't there, it's not helping NWS. It's not helping them, especially if it doesn't verify what is on radar. There's a lot of things that people see, a lot of things that people think they see that doesn't show up on radar, and then confuses NWS, and you know, they don't understand what's going on. The last thing they want to do is issue a warning on something that is not there. You know, especially now, NWS is under a lot of pressure to loosen funding. You know, their biggest resource is volunteers, and then that's everyone here and anyone else that's spotting, and they need those volunteers to spot and give correct and accurate reports so they can issue the warnings properly. Without that, they are not going to be able to do their job. I mean, you can only do so much with radar sitting in a building, you know, for 12 hours straight watching a storm system roll through. You know, like I said, you can also have different things like rain, nighttime, distant object. I mean, you have to gauge where you are within the storm. You can't report something that, you know, you think is across the county that maybe you're seeing and you think's a wall cloud. Because first off, you have different cloud structures. You have shelf clouds. You have all kinds of, you have scud. You have all kinds of different things. We'll look at pictures of that it can be. And if you're not up close enough to really report accurately, you don't want to report it unless you really think that there is a danger and it needs to be reported and you really feel that it's true, and you can verify with radar or verify even with someone else. When we spot around here a lot, most of the time, sometimes not, but I mean most of the time there's somebody at least that can verify radar versus what people are seeing. So if I'm seeing something out in the field and I say, hey, there is definite what looks like rotation hitting the ground, but I'm a little far away and I can't verify, I can say, hey, it's over by this area, this part of the city. Somebody says, okay, let me look at radar, let me verify, see if there's any rotation. They can say, no, there's really not rotation showing up in this area, so maybe it's a fluke, maybe it's a rain shaft, maybe it's something that's causing different circulation from buildings to any kind of terrain change or anything like that can cause rotation on the ground with nothing aloft. But also, you can also get rotation on the ground where you can't even see the actual funnel coming down connecting to it. There's a lot of tornadoes that start out spinning, but you can't see anything until it hits the ground. So you need that radar verification to make sure that you're reporting the correct thing. We also, like I said, talked about time. One of the biggest problems, and I was just reading an article on this a couple weeks ago, one of the biggest problems they're having right now is people reporting things and not giving correct timing. Timing is one of the most important things so that they can verify and match up to radar. And most everyone now has a cell phone. Your cell phone is your best thing to look at for timing because your cell phone is automatically synced all the time. Unless you can verify that your watch is 100% right, if you had a cell phone, I would use your cell phone time. Even if it's 2 or 3, 4 minutes difference. That can make a heck of a difference on what's showing up on radar with time reporting. Another big one is what they call location swapping. If I say that I see a tornado that's 8 miles to my, or 5 miles to my south of the, and I'm in this city, well, sometimes if you're not careful, you can flip that where you're 5 miles south of the city and you see the tornado. Instead, really, the tornado was 5 miles south of the city. So they have to go back and, NWS spends a ton of time going back and verifying reports and matching up spotter reports with radar and verifying on what the spotter is saying is what happened on radar, along with when they're getting damage assessments. And once again, we also have the chain error where every time you tell someone, somebody adds something to it or takes something from it, it ends up being a completely different story by the time you get to 3 or 4 people. So, there's a lot of studies on spotter reports and what's the percentage of errors. And like this says here, there's anywhere from 10 to 30%. 30% is high. I hope it's not that high. It's a possibility. I mean, it just depends because there's a lot of research out there that have, and actually back in the presentation, actually mentioned a little bit about there are people that specifically report things just because, stuff that's not even happening, for whatever reason. It's a big problem. I didn't realize until I was reading through this and another article that was linked with this, that they have problems with people reporting things that aren't there, and then they basically said that people like to report stuff to make themselves feel better for whatever reason, and that was a finding by the NWS.
And just to interject real quick, it is a criminal offense to falsely report something, knowingly falsely report a severe weather event that is not occurring.
They actually prosecute several people a year for that. all over the United States, actually, which I didn't realize. But they just have so many things going on. The last thing they want to deal with is some bogus report that makes no sense at all. This kind of gives you an idea of how to, you know, mitigate, as it says, you know, or refrain from making inaccurate reports, and you know, because not everyone does it on, you know, on purpose. Most people do it because it's either, you know, they're in that moment where they're just trying to get the report in, and they, you know, they want to make the report. So, you know, you got to be clear in your report. Make sure you are not. Make sure you're calm. You know, if you're reporting, some people get really hyped up. Make sure you're calm. Make sure everything is clear. Make sure you're speaking and using terms that are related to the weather that's going on. You know, if you have 3/4 inch hail, say 3/4 inch hail, or you know, the NWS has a chart that you can use different, you know, golf balls, pea, baseball, soft. You know, hopefully we never get softball, but they have it for people to use. You know, and provide the best location you can. Provide landmarks. Provide cross streets. You know, if somebody just says, "Oh, there's a tornado west of Muncie." West of Muncie can be a lot of things, you know. So when you're reporting it, be really specific. Be as specific as you can. Sometimes you don't know the area that well, but get some kind of cross street. Get, you know, hopefully when you're spotting, if you can, you maybe either have a map or you have someone else with you that can help you do that. It's much easier if as you're storm spotting with multiple people, so you can get the proper information, and so you can confirm what you're seeing is what you're seeing. Because sometimes, you know, when you're out storm spotting, and I've done this several times, you know, somebody's like, "Oh, is that?" You're like, "Nah, I don't think so," you know, and then you're like, "Yeah, I see that, but there's not really any rotation." So, you know, it's okay to do that with each other because it helps out, and then maybe the other person will see what you're seeing, or they could, you know, they could fight back and say, no, there is rotation over here, you know. Maybe they're not looking at the same thing. So always identify yourself, provide your contact info. Sometimes NWS will want to call you back. They might want more information. They might want even a more exact location. You know, you are going to know, most of the time, even if you don't know exactly the roads and stuff, you're going to know where you saw what you saw for the most part. I mean, you're going to be able to at least take them back there or drive back there after the fact. So, you know, like I said, report directly if you can. Report as close to the source, as close to the weather forecast office as you can. The more people you can avoid in between by the time it goes from you to the weather forecast office, the better. You know, this is another thing on time. You know, it kind of talks about the time again. Is it really 6, or is it, you know, plus 5 minutes makes a big difference. So, you know, maybe you're the only one out there. What if you're the only one to report? You know, you might be that one person that could save someone's life in the house, you know, 3 or 4 miles away from that area if there's a tornado on the ground. You know, there could be different things that come into play. Like I said, the terrain could come into play. Time, and then the other big factors are you seeing it or experiencing it? Is that what you're seeing, or is it hitting your house? You know, are you a storm spotter, or are you a general public that's just reporting, you know, something hitting your house? You know, because you may not even know. You may be tucked away. You may be hiding, you know, in your basement. This is kind of some conclusions they had listed. You know, like I said, spotter reports are extremely important no matter who they come from. There are going to be different levels of spotter reports. Spotter reports, you know, that are poor, you know, most of us try to report as accurately as we can. Sometimes we're not always right, you know. Everyone's wrong, no matter who it is. You know, the National Weather Service is wrong, storm spotters can be wrong. But you just try to do it as accurately as you can. It's a big deal, you know, especially nowadays. There's a lot more. It seems like this year anyway, a lot more of urban areas getting hit. So the better that these things can be spotted before they hit the urban areas, you know, the safer that people will be. You know, you can contact a local National Weather Service and get more information. You know, if you are interested in, you know, different trainings than what they offer here, they do offer different things like reporting rain totals and things like that as well. So if you're interested in that, so that's pretty much it on that. Look, I'm going to go through some pictures real quick. I'm going to fairly quickly. I know Brandon's got to get up. These are just a few that I found online, and I'm not going to go through every single one of them, but you know, this is just there's several of these in a row. The precipitation shafts that look similar to a, you know, what could be a rotation. This one that says actually was rain and hail, and so you just got to be careful with what you're reporting. You get a lot of different things inflow into the storm. Sometimes you'll see one here at the end. You can see that one barely. It looks like partially rain-wrapped tornado. Instead, it's basically sun illuminating a break in the clouds where the precipitation core is. So you just got to watch for rotation in that instance. Another instance of precipitation shaft. When I went to the plains this summer, we saw a lot of this type of thing, where a lot of precipitation shafts that you can see really far off in the distance that actually can look like a possible funnel or something if you're not careful in what you're looking at. Another one way off in the distance. Big precipitation core here that somebody could possibly identify as a wedge if you're not, you know, I mean, something like this you would want to verify on radar, because just looking at that, you can look at that and think, wow, that could be something huge, but you look at the radar and it's just a big rain core and there's no rotation. Downbursts are another thing. If you see them off in the distance, they can be really hard to identify what they are. This one's a really grainy picture, but you can, same thing, you could identify this as a wedge. Here's another precipitation core that looks like a possible wedge. It's all about identifying radar versus what you're seeing. What you're seeing isn't always what's on the radar, and as Brandon and I learned this past spring, what you see on the radar isn't always what's in the field either. I mean, we had some really low-topped precipitation storms over by Plainfield this summer, and you know, and we're on amateur radio, and a guy's calling us crazy because we're out, and next thing you know, there's a tornado warning, and I don't know if they ever confirmed the touchdown, but there was a barn that was destroyed right there in Plainfield. It wasn't very strong, but you couldn't even hardly see the storms on radar. I mean, there was nothing. It showed up as green. There was no red. I don't even know if there was yellow or not. Was there any yellow even?
No.
Yeah, I mean, it was unbelievable. So, you know, you just got to verify with both. I mean, that's the best thing.
Don't interject. If you don't have radar access and you're out spotting and you think you see a tornado but you're not completely positive, tell the National Weather Service that. Don't say there's a tornado. Say, I think it looks like there could be a tornado on the ground. I cannot completely verify that they would.
Right.
I mean, they want those reports, but just make sure you're identifying.
Just tell them the truth, what you see. I mean, if you're not seeing a for sure tornado, just tell them that. You know, sometimes you just don't know. I mean, sometimes there's no easy way to identify it. And these are a lot of wall clouds and scud that, you know, can almost seem like they're touching the ground. But a lot of them, you know, you can get a lot of these like this one that doesn't rotate, but it looks like there's something coming all the way to the ground. Another one, you know, off in the distance with terrain. Once you get the terrain in the mix, when I was in Nebraska this summer, there's in South Dakota, you would think, oh wow, you know, what's that? But then you drive closer to it and come up on the hill and you realize that it's still way above the ground, even though it looks like something was touching the ground. A lot of non-rotating wall clouds are probably one of the, especially the real elongated ones, are probably the most common things that are reported as a tornado that really aren't.
Just remember that last picture, I mean, clued me in on this. remember a tornado and funnel cloud always rotate. There's no such thing as a non-rotating funnel cloud or a non-rotating tornado.
Yeah.
So if it's not rotating, it's not a tornado.
Right. Yeah, which if it's not rotating, and there's a wall cloud, more than likely there's not enough shear in the environment and not enough spin to actually pull a tornado out of the storm. I mean, it's probably a strong storm, but there's not enough, it's not strong enough to produce a tornado probably at that point. And I think that's pretty much it on this. I mean, that's a pretty impressive one there. I mean, that's a lot of these elongated wall cloud, lowering wall clouds / scud, not rotating. Gustnados, I mean, those are impressive in its own feat. I realized that this summer. I'll kind of end on that. This summer, there was a lot of there was a big storm that came through, and Brandon was on it as well in the plains. There was gustnados everywhere. I mean, there was literally, there would be 15 to 20 gustnados everywhere, all around you. And as we were coming, we were actually calling it a night for the most part, the group I was with, and we're driving down the interstate, and the gustnado that formed to the left-hand side of us was probably the most massive gustnado I've ever seen. And and we talked to some people within the meteorological people down in Nebraska. We talked to a couple of meteorologists on TV. We talked to a couple of people from NWS. The TV people are like, yeah, it's a fine line with a gustnado because something that well defined, most people are going to call a tornado. But technically it's not, because it forms from the ground up. And
if you don't know what a gustnado is, it's on the leading edge of the gust front, a lot of times associated with the squall line, where you get the winds kicking up underneath the shelf cloud, but you don't have actually a mesocyclone or rotation or a wall cloud.
Yeah, it forms from the ground up, and a lot of times they don't connect with the cloud bases. But this one seemingly did. I mean, it's just the way it formed, and we talked with a lot of people. In National Weather Service, we actually contacted them, and they saw pictures and video that we had, and they confirmed it was a gustnado. It's probably the closest thing to a tornado that will not be a tornado that I've ever seen. But you have a lot of that, and and even National Weather Service and the meteorologists, could it be reported as a tornado? Possibly, but technically it's not. It's still good to get the reports out. They can verify later from other spotters, what it is. Just make sure, if you're reporting accurately as you can. I mean, we can only do as much as what we see in the tools that we have. And we're all doing the same thing. We're all out in the same boat trying to, public safety, trying to keep people aware and keep people in the loop of inclement weather. And hopefully, we can keep doing that and keep doing it accurately. I think most people do a pretty good job. So that's all I got. Brandon's going to do a talk on radar and the different types and things like that. So I will turn it over.
You want to talk now or afterwards, Joe?
Yeah, you want to talk now about amateur radio?
Yeah, I'll talk a little bit. Since you touched on communication, how many people here are hands? Majority. Good. Good. What Luke was talking about really quick is that National Weather Service, the timeliness of reports is an issue. Getting timely reports to National Weather Service. If the general public calls 911, 911 calls EMA, EMA then calls National Weather Service, you've got a time lag going on, so you don't have real-time reports. With amateur radio, guys that are hands already know this, it's almost immediate. It's real time. If there's a spotter in the field, he sees a rotating wall cloud, he calls it into the net, the local net relays that to Indianapolis. That is actually the amateur radio operator sitting right there in the National Weather Service office next to the warning officer. So if he sees a lowering, a funnel cloud, if he sees a tornado forming, and the spotter reports that, within 15, 20 seconds or less, that information is at National Weather Service in Indianapolis. Indianapolis is able to issue the warning. If they can confirm that on radar or through other means as well, they see that there is rotation, that the storm could be tornadic, they're going to issue a tornado warning. That's how you get instant warnings. And that's about the only way that it can happen. Everything else is going to be delayed. So amateur radar is reliable, and it's very useful. So, and it's important in the Skywarn process. You don't have to be a ham to be involved in Skywarn. You can call in directly to National Weather Service. You can call in the 911 or your EMA office in some areas, and they can relay that message for you. But it's like I said, if you're a ham, it's a lot quicker and a lot easier. Plus, you're part of a group and organized effort that goes out to spot and to actually observe these storms and get accurate data. So, if you're interested, if you're not a ham and you're interested in becoming a ham, I usually do 1 or 2 classes a year, and I'll do one either this fall or sometime in the early, maybe January or February, if people are interested.
That's how I met him.
Yeah, that's how I met.
Me too.
Yeah, exactly, and a few other people in here. So if you're interested in storm spotting and you really want to get serious about it and you want to participate in Skywarn locally, Lucas is going to be trying to organize a Skywarn team, try to get more organization, so we have people that are, and we can have regular meetings, et cetera, of just Skywarn. So if you're interested in that, we can do that. I don't know the best way to, if you're interested, the best thing I can do, a couple things you can do. SWATchasers.com, our website for our severe weather alert team. Go there, go to our Facebook site if you're there, friend us on Facebook, or like us on Facebook, and you can get updates there. If I'm going to do a ham class, it'll be announced there. If you're not on Facebook, you don't want to be on Facebook, W9YFD at W9YFD.org. You can send an email there that say you're interested, give me your contact information, and when I do a class, I'll get a hold of you. The class will either be held here at the Yorktown Fire Station, and the more the merrier as far as I'm concerned. I'd like to do that a couple times a year, like I said. I don't know if there's really much else. Let Brandon go here, and it's, if you're interested, just let us know.
Yeah, we'll be around after the meeting for a little bit. First off, before I get started, stop me and ask me questions. I'm going to pack a lot of information in the next hour and a half about how to use radar. I am extremely passionate about weather. I am a self-proclaimed 150% weather nerd. I have been interested in weather since I was 5 years old, so if there's something I say that doesn't make sense, ask me. And I will make sure I answer any questions I can for you. Just go through, you guys are all spotters for the most part. A lot of you are involved in amateur radio, so a lot of times when you're running the net, there's somebody running radar for the net. So I'm going to try to give you a little bit more background about what to look for on radar, not just when you're looking at the reflectivity, but also for rotation, hail, all those different type of things. And then I'm going to go through a couple of case studies that are actually recent and show you kind of how the patterns evolved, what causes severe weather to form, the different types of severe weather those days. And the 2 days I'm going to use are October, what day was that? I have it on my 26th, I think. October 26, 2010, which was a high-risk day, and May 25th, 2011, which was a high-risk day. Oh, there we go. Obviously, you know who I am. I made this too fancy. Okay, weather radar. It was installed, it's called WSR-88D because it was installed in 1988. It's when they started the new generation of NextRed. This is what it looks like. It looks like a big white dome. It transmits very short pulses of radiation. And basically what it looks for is return to the atmosphere. So as it sees rain, it picks up on that on the reflectivity, and it shows up on your radar screen. But there's limiting factors. Terrain, buildings, insects, birds, a fraction of the scattered energy goes back to the radar. A couple of nights ago, there was a prime example of mayflies on the La Crosse, Wisconsin radar, which was being detected as precipitation. Instead, it was millions and millions and millions of bugs that were hatching on the Mississippi River. These are the radar sites across the country. The radar network is far from accurate. Here in East Central Indiana and the Muncie area, we lay on the far fringe of the Indianapolis radar, in between the Indianapolis, North Webster, and Wilmington, which means the lower levels of the velocity scans, which we use to detect tornadoes, are not accurate in this area. That's why you guys are so important. Spotters in the fringe area of the radar network become extremely important because you supplement the radar data. And this shows the areas in blue and green are the areas that we have fairly good radar signal. The blue circles is where we have best radar coverage all the way down to the lowest levels. Well, you can see here in Delaware and Randolph County, we're right on the fringe. If you see areas of red, those are areas that have almost no radar coverage whatsoever. And believe it or not, there's still a lot of areas today that don't have weather radar coverage, including one of the prime radar holes that you'll hear storm chasers and meteorologists talk about, and that's northern Missouri. There's supposed to be legislation to change that. Kirkland, Missouri, and northern Missouri was struck by an EF4 tornado about 8 years ago that went undetected. Well, 8 years later, there's still no radar there. But supposedly that's something that's supposed to be trying to be fixed. And up close and personal, you can see that Delaware County and especially Randolph County is a pretty good distance from the radar. Randolph County is even worse than what we are, and they have pretty much anything below 3.5, or the 3 lowest layers of the radar site, are not useful in the far eastern parts of the state. So elevation angle considerations. Radar is usually aimed above the horizon to minimize ground clutter, but it's not perfect. Like I said with Randolph County, the beam gains altitude, or here in Delaware County, as it gets farther from the radar site. What this means is it limits the ability to see close to the surface. In Delaware and Randolph County, we can see the mid and upper layers of the atmosphere, and we can tell if there's rotation in the mid and upper layers, but because we're so far from the radar site, we cannot see the surface. So that's again why you guys are so important. The other thing is radars cannot see directly overhead, and that's called the cone of silence. So Indianapolis International Airport is what we consider the cone of silence here in Indiana. And actually, this is a radar shot from last night. Wichita, Kansas got struck by a very intense thunderstorm with 70 and 80 mile per hour winds. I saw this, and like I said, a weather nerd, I spend all my time when I'm at home, whether I'm watching TV, the radar is always up. So I see this severe thunderstorm last night in Wichita, and I'm like, oh, that's an impressive thunderstorm. Pull up radar. Well, sure enough, it's right over the radar site. You can see that we have high reflectivities all around, but here's the radar site, and there's nothing in that cone of silence. So that's another limitation of the Doppler radar. This shows that as you go farther out, and you're 12 miles, the radar beams continue to extend farther up, which means you're losing that lower level of visibility. Scanning modes, clear air mode, and precipitation mode. I'm not sure if you've ever seen when the National Weather Service has the radar in clear air mode. Typically that means that nothing's really occurring, there's no thunderstorms, so they have it in a higher sensitivity so they can see more, like outflow boundaries, frontal boundaries, things like that. And this is your clear air mode scale over here. It only goes to 28 dBz, which means, that's generally below what we see in any thunderstorms. And then your regular precipitation mode goes from 0 to 75, obviously the white and the reds being the most intense. So just to kind of show you what they both look like, your clear air mode on the left has the red reflectivity because all it's basically scanning for is boundaries. And then the National Weather Service changes the radar to precipitation mode when you have actually thunderstorms and showers taking place in that area. Reflectivity products. If you've used any of the GR products, you know that there's a base reflectivity and composite reflectivity. Base reflectivity is used for precipitation detection and intensity. Higher reflectivities obviously mean heavy rainfall or possibly larger raindrops, which can be confused for heavy rainfall. Also, a lot of times you can get hail contamination because the radar thinks that hail is rainfall. What the composite reflectivity does is it takes every scan of the atmosphere and it combines it as one. It's good for detecting strong updrafts. It's good for detecting severe thunderstorms. So a lot of times that's what you'll see on the television when they're using radar is the composite. And just to kind of show you the difference, there's your base on the left, your composite on the right. For the most part, they're similar, but you can tell that this composite's scanning every layer of the atmosphere. You got some deeper reds here than what you have over here. And this is kind of a better picture of exactly what's occurring. Radar estimation, precipitation, generally 1 in 3 hours, and total precipitation. The big thing with this is it is not perfect. And pretty much if there's been any type of hail with a thunderstorm, you can't use it. because the radar detects that hail as precipitation and automatically inflates those rainfall amounts. And this is just kind of what that looks like. Your velocity products. This is what we use to detect rotation, microburst, anything along with those lines. There's two different types of velocity. There's the regular base velocity and storm relative velocity, but basically what it does is it scans the atmosphere and looks for winds going towards and away from the radar site. Positive values equal winds moving away from the radar, negative values winds moving towards the radar, and it can be used to detect rotation, fronts and boundaries, mesoscale circulations, microbursts, and tornadoes. And that is one of the prime ways that the National Weather Service warns tornadoes outside of spotters. Your base velocity is good for large scale and straight line winds, where your storm relative velocity is what typically we use for detecting convergent and divergent flows and also circulations. The reason for that is the storm relative velocity takes into account the speed of the storm, which can a lot of times obscure the actual rotation that's occurring. So that's a lot of times why we end up using the storm relative velocity for detecting tornadoes. And this is a good example. This was the Oakland, Wisconsin F5 tornado. This is your base velocity that it does not take into account the speed of the storm, and it's really hard to see a whole lot of rotation with the storm, where the storm relative velocity automatically factors in how fast the storm's moving, and you can see this real tight couplet here where the reds are meeting the greens, and that's where that tornado was. And there's just the difference too. So you have your green, which is your winds moving towards the radar, your red, which is the reds moving away from the radar. And as those two meet, when you get the red and the greens that collide in an actual gate-to-gate fashion, which is where they butt right up against each other, which is right here in between those two arrows, is when you get rotation that develops. And that's what the National Weather Service uses to look for possible tornadoes. The other thing we use the velocity products to do is to look for strong winds and what we call a rear inflow jet. This is actually a squall line from Iowa from last month, and you can see it's a perfect looking squall line on radar. Well, automatically we look at the velocity products and we know that this is going to produce damaging winds because you can see these bright blues, which I wish I had the radar scale up, but those are maxed out on the radar. 80 to 90 knot winds, which means we have a strong inflow jet punching into this squall line. So the chance for damaging winds is extremely high. So if you see an area of maxed out reflectivity or maxed out velocity over a large area behind a squall line, good chance it's producing some very destructive winds. This is the big one, vertically integrated liquid. When they first developed radar in 1988, everybody thought it was the best thing since sliced bread. We can detect hail now, we know how big the hail is. But as we started doing studies, we found out this is not very accurate. BIL is basically what it stands for. BIL, vertically integrated liquid, is the amount of liquid water that the radar detects in a vertical column of the atmosphere for an area of precipitation. High values are often associated with heavy rain or hail. This is the big Chicago supercell back in July. You can see this area of gray and white here is maxed out vertically integrated liquid on the radar. So obviously, chances are there's going to be some big hail with that storm. And there was. Limitations, though. What we found is that the vertically integrated liquid is not a catch-all for hail size. So even though your radar, and I know a lot of everyone in here uses GR Level 3, they use Analyst from the Gibson Ridge products. Even though your radar is showing that there's 3-inch hail with the storm, that does not mean that's happening, because all that is going off of is the vertically integrated liquid. Values within 20 miles of the radar will be underestimated, and values in the far distance part of the radar, including here in Delaware County, likely will be underestimated. But you also have to factor in what's happening in the atmosphere that day. If there's warm air aloft and the lapse rates are not very steep, which is the freezing levels, then chances are you're not going to have good hail growth, even though the radar is showing, or the bill is showing that there's large hail. So like I said, it's not a catch-all, and it all depends on the atmosphere It's a good reference point, but just because radar is showing that there's 3-inch hail does not mean there's 3-inch hail. So the moral of the story, do not use Bill alone for hail size. The atmosphere of the day is the biggest factor used when diagnosing a storm. I mean, obviously that's a little bit above a typical spotter's or amateur radio's knowledge level, but the biggest thing that I'm trying to point out is that spotter reports are huge, and don't use Bill to automatically estimate that there's going to be 4-inch hail because the radar's telling you so. Echo tops, you're sitting on a day and a high-risk day and there's no thunderstorms on the radar. First thing I do is I start looking at echo tops. Basically all that is the cloud height within a thunderstorm. And this will show up before precipitation is ever detected. You'll start seeing echo tops showing that there's storms building 30 and 40,000 feet before any precipitation starts falling. So if you're looking for where storms might form, this is your place to start. This is last night, actually. This is out in Kansas too, northwest of Wichita. And basically you can see here's what the radar looks like. You have your precipitation occurring, and then your echo tops, which show that the storm is 40 and 50,000 feet. And there's a key on the left-hand side that'll show you how tall those storms are. Okay, this is one of my things I want to concentrate on because it can get confusing. The GR Analyst is great. It has a lot of great features, but it has also opened up a big can of worms because of the 3D volumetric displays. Right off the bat, just to make sure everyone knows, those are just displays. They do not display anything that might actually be happening. They are an interpretation display of the storm. I mean, it might look like there's a tornado, but that doesn't mean there's a tornado just because the 3D display shows there is. The best way to detect rotation on radar is by using the velocity products. The 3D features, all it does is take a volumetric 3D display of what the radar thinks the storm looks like and what the interpretation is, and then cranks it out for you to view. Sometimes it can be accurate. This is actually an archived product of an actual tornado earlier this year. I mean, you can see it looks just like a tornado on the 3D display, but like I said, the big thing is don't assume that's always right. There's a lot of things that can interfere with the radar: trees, mountains, buildings, insects, birds, bats, and other targets. You need to be conscientious of those when you're watching radar. And a lot of times they don't look like actual thunderstorms. You're just going to see little blobs of precipitation. So ground color, stationary objects usually filtered out, swaying trees or towers may show up. Look for drifting high reflectivity returns near the radar. If you see this little tiny blob of red near the Indianapolis radar but nothing else, chances are it's ground clutter. Building blockage, especially in urban areas. If you're in like the Indianapolis area, buildings can and will block radar. So taking a look at a few examples, like I said, I was just talking about this on my Facebook page earlier this week. This right here is La Crosse, Wisconsin. This was Tuesday night, I think. And every year on the Mississippi River, mayflies hatch. Millions of them. Not just 100, not just 1,000, but millions, to the point where they have to call snowplows in on bridges to remove all of the dead mayflies. I mean, that's that bad. So here's the La Crosse radar, Mississippi River right down the state border. What does it look like? It looks like precipitation. Well, if you loop the radar, you see that it doesn't move whatsoever. All that is ground clutter because the radar is detecting these millions of flying bugs.
Is that in clear air mode?
No.
Really?
That's in precipitation mode.
Wow.
I mean, it was showing up all the way up to 30 dBz on the radar. This is what ground clutter looks like. Hopefully everybody's seen it. And if you see the same type of precipitation pattern with the little blue and green 20, 30 dBz speckles all across the radar, all that is ground clutter. Obviously not a thunderstorm or precipitation. This is what happens when you get into an urban area. The radar beam, which is up here scanning, but you have a building somewhere in here that's blocked the radar beam, so you lose that radar beam refraction all the way out. So if you see a little sliver of the radar missing, that's building interference. This is another insects flying on the radar near northeast winds in Nebraska or South Carolina. These are bats, and bats are extremely common early in the morning to be picked up by radar. Also traffic, like Lucas has said, if you look in the morning or in the evening in the Indianapolis area, you will see traffic on the radar showing up on the I-465 split. Okay, getting into some of the past events and talking about a couple significant severe weather events that we had this last year. But first I want to talk about what the National Weather Service looks for. And this is pretty much an unwritten rule that the National Weather Service always uses when issuing severe thunderstorm and tornado warnings. It's called the rule of threes. And they need 2 of the 3 following items to issue a warning. Radar signature, the atmosphere of the day, which means what's happening right then and there, and spotter reports. If the radar is the only thing that's indicating it, but the atmosphere says no, there's not going to be severe weather today, there's no lift, there's no instability, there's no wind shear, without something else going along with that radar signature, chances are the National Weather Service will not issue a warning. They look for 2 of those 3. So that's why you guys are so important, because you're the 3rd component of that system. But that's also another thing to go back to, is if you call in a funnel cloud and the National Weather Service doesn't issue a tornado warning, chances are there's probably a reason. You got to remember there's all different types of funnel clouds. There's actually supercellular funnel clouds. You have cold air funnels, which typically aren't dangerous. So there's probably a reason a warning doesn't get issued most of the time if you don't see one.
Atmospheric soundings,
Like atmospheric soundings is basically what the atmosphere is capable of that day. So if there's a thunderstorm on radar, but there's no wind shear or lift in the atmosphere, chances are it's not going to become severe. And that's something the National Weather Service uses, or meteorologists use, to know what the atmosphere is capable
What
of.
the soundings like from a weather balloon or instruments?
Weather balloon, forecast models, surface observations, so like your dew point and your temperature combine to create how much instability there is in the atmosphere.
That's something that a spotter would not really have access to.
Correct. Yeah. Unless you have some type of higher education in the meteorology field, you'd probably not know that. But I'm just trying to give you an outline of what the National Weather Service looks for when they're issuing warnings. Okay, so just I'm trying to balance radar with kind of what goes into severe weather outbreaks. October 26, 2010, huge severe weather outbreak across the Midwest. And actually we had a record low pressure system in the continental U.S. with a non-tropical cyclone. Broke all existing records, and you can see this massive cyclone in the northern plains, which looks just like a hurricane because, I mean, it's that large and that well developed. But what happens when you get these large cyclones is the wind shear at the lower levels of the atmosphere becomes extremely strong. They have a lot of diverging winds, a lot of converging winds, and that causes 2 things. Number 1, depending on what type of wind shear it is, it causes straight line winds and damaging winds, or tornadoes and rotation within the thunderstorms. So several days out, the models began indicating a significant severe weather outbreak across the Ohio Valley. In fact, I was in Gatlinburg when this happened, and my friends hated me because I made them leave a day early. So here, basically, here's the setup, and this is just trying to give you a little bit of knowledge and whet your appetites maybe just a little bit as to what to look for on severe weather events. Of course, I mean, the 2 biggest things that as spotters you need to be watching are the Storm Prediction Center outlooks, whether we're in a slight, moderate, or high risk. And just because we're in a slight risk doesn't mean severe weather won't happen. And also, the National Weather Service hazardous weather outlook, and at the bottom of it, it says whether they'll need spotter activation. And typically, 9 out of 10 times, that's a good feel for whether there's going to be severe weather. Every once in a while, you'll get spotter activation not expected, and in the afternoon, you'll get some severe thunderstorms pop up. It's not perfect, but... So you have your strong low pressure system. You can see the 965 up there in Minnesota. You have your triple point, which is right here where the low pressure and occluded front meet the warm front and the cold front. And then you have Indiana and Ohio, which are stuck in the middle. Anytime we're in the middle of all those 3, that's a bad sign. So we're right in the crosshairs of the system, and you can see the pressure gradient, which are all these isobars lining up below the low pressure system. Isobars are basically a way to measure the amount of wind that a system has. The differentiating gradient between high pressures and low pressures, which in turn create strong winds. So you can see those all wound up. And before we start going through the actual scenario of what happened and looking at some radar images, these are the reports that happened that day. Blues, wind, black squares are violent winds, and then the red are all tornadoes. So the Storm Prediction Center started cranking this up. making sure people are aware the day before. We had a day 2 moderate risk, which is pretty rare, covering pretty much all of Indiana and all of Ohio. Started forecasting widespread damaging winds. I see that this is going to be a big system, so I'm like, hello people, dangerous weather days expected. Making sure that people are aware. We have high wind watches, high wind warnings, and the day of we get the once a year, twice a year occurrence of a high risk day. Very rare. If you see the Storm Prediction Center's places in their high risk for severe weather, the chances of severe weather are much greater than not. Typically, I don't know that I ever recall a high risk of busting in Indiana and Ohio. So if you see a high risk day, get your game plan ready as a spotter because it's going to be a busy day. For the first time ever in Indiana, the Storm Prediction Center maxes out wind probabilities. 60% risk of damaging winds. It's the highest they've ever been in Indiana before. So we know that something bad is going to happen. That morning, first tornado watch is issued for portions of central Indiana at 4:30. The SPC, Storm Prediction Center tornado watch probabilities include an 80% chance of 2 or more tornadoes and a 90% chance or higher of at least 6 or more combined severe weather events. That's about as high as the probabilities get. And it covers pretty much all areas west of Indianapolis. You can see 4:30 in the morning, right along this cold front, we already have a dangerous squall line of severe thunderstorms. And if you don't know what a squall line is, it's a long line of thunderstorms capable of producing widespread damaging winds. So as the day goes on, the QLCS, which if you ever hear it referred to by the National Weather Service or me or meteorologists, is basically the same thing as a squall line, a quasi-linear convective system. But you get severe thunderstorm warnings and tornado warnings on the entire squall line. Well, we refer to that atmosphere of the day, which I talked about earlier, the atmosphere soundings. Well, that day the atmosphere had a lot of wind shear in the atmosphere. So the chances of damaging winds is high, but also the chances of tornadoes is high. And anytime you get a squall line like that, embedded tornadoes are extremely likely. So we start the day off with the National Weather Service in northern Indiana issuing tornado warnings for the entire line in their county warning area. Indianapolis, on the other hand, is going for severe thunderstorm warnings with a few embedded tornado warnings in the areas of more intense circulation. Well, this is where you guys come in. We start getting reports in the central Indiana area of not only shelf clouds and damaging winds, but tornadoes. Immediately, the National Weather Service in Indianapolis switches modes and starts tornado warning the entire line of severe thunderstorms. Also, a new tornado watch issued for eastern Indiana and western Ohio. To also put this event into perspective, over 75% of the counties in Indiana that day at one point were under a tornado warning, which is extremely rare. So watching the radar signatures, this is the radar loop. We start off with a squall line, but watch by the time it gets to the eastern part of Indiana and into western Ohio. Those reds become much more prominent. We're getting a much stronger squall line and the chance of widespread damaging winds and tornadoes. Looking at the radar, and we're going to go into this more in depth, but in eastern Indiana we start to get what we call inflow notches, which are areas where the squall line bends. That's a good area for rotation to develop. So that's why we have those tornado warnings, because we have all these little inflow notches on the squall line where tornadoes can form out ahead of the actual shelf cloud and gust front. So by 9:30 a.m., storms begin to intensify across central and northern Indiana with multiple areas of rotation being indicated. Both National Weather Service offices start issuing tornado warnings. And if you ever follow the text of National Weather Service warnings, which got cut off, the National Weather Service Doppler radar indicated a severe squall line capable of producing brief rain-wrapped tornadoes in addition to widespread damaging winds. So we have 2 threats this day. But really, it doesn't matter because the widespread damaging winds are going to produce just as much damage as what most of the tornadoes are. But here's your squall line. But start looking real closely. Here's Henry County. Just southwest of Newcastle, we have an inflow notch. You can see where the squall line bends. Just southwest of Daleville, we have another inflow notch moving into Delaware County. Any bends in the squall line where you see little appendages coming into it, it's called an inflow notch. And I'm going to show you the velocity products to kind of show you how that compares. You start seeing areas of enhanced rotation. Like I said, stop me if anybody has any questions. Southern part of the line, south of I-70, continues to stay a solid squall line. So that portion of the line continues to be severe thunderstorm warned. Most people remember this day because these were the days, this day in October was the day we had the long duration tornado warnings that lasted an hour that got issued 45 minutes before the thing ever got here because the National Weather Service was trying to give as much notice as possible. The northern half of the squall line, though, from Hancock County farther north, starts to rotate. You see all those little appendages, all those little loops, the inflow notches, so we start getting tornado warnings. The reason that happened is the farther south you went the line, the farther away from that low pressure system you got. There was less wind shear. So more damaging winds, but less chances for tornadoes and rotation. Starting to look at the velocity products, and this is a hard one if you don't know what you're looking for, because you don't have the reds and the greens, you just have these reds that are maxed out in some areas, but if you start looking real close, you get some areas of higher velocities. Anytime you have those butting up in this whole squall line, so this whole squall line you have outbound winds that's 60, 70 knots, but in these few areas you start getting some really high velocity winds. And that's an indication that there could be embedded tornadoes. So we have several of those north of I-70, Hancock County, Madison County, Henry County, and the Delaware County. And this is a little bit better look at it, different color table, but you can see every one of these is an area of embedded rotation, and this is northern Indiana, especially this one right here by North Manchester. So as I said, storms begin to exhibit characteristics associated with widespread straight-line wind damage and the potential for tornadoes. But as the storm enters Randolph County, it really starts to bow out. As you see any part of a squall line really bowing out like that, you have to watch for extreme damaging wind potential, which unfortunately is what happened in Parker City. And this is from the National Weather Service Storm Survey. And this is the damage that the squall line did, not a tornado, the squall line. Significant damage was observed in western Randolph County. It's caused by straight line winds, with winds estimated at about 80 miles per hour. That day, there were 21 tornadoes in the state, 13 of which happened in northern Indiana, 5 of which in central Indiana, and I think 5 in southern Indiana. I don't remember the exact count, but 23 altogether. Storms moved into western Ohio. We're getting sunshine. It's 11:30 in the morning. They're continuing to intensify. You can see this. I was actually at work that day. It was crazy. But you can see the squall line continues to intensify as it moves towards the Columbus area. And just to show what squall lines can actually do, not a supercell, a squall line, we had an embedded EF2 tornado touchdown that day in Auglaize County near Cridersville. And it was extremely hard to detect. But if you look at the radar, the reflectivity product, you can see the squall line and you see this little bit of an inflow notch right here near Cridersville. In that same area, we get very, very subtle signs of rotation. And granted, they're really far away from the radar, about as far as you can go in western Ohio. But we get a little bit of subtle rotation here between Cridersville and, I don't know what the name of that town is, but just west of Cridersville where the red and the greens are meeting. Ended up producing a strong EF2 tornado with widespread damage, and this was Cridersville after the tornado went through. Luckily, the National Weather Service tornado warned the whole line. They were under tornado warning, had plenty of notice. There were only a couple minor injuries, no fatalities. The one tornado that National Weather Service Wilmington has ever confirmed in Darke County, because we were under tornado warning, inside joke. But Darke County, this is where I work, where I live, and we had a tornado touchdown that day. A little bit easier to see. You see the squall line, you see it bending back here a little bit with the oranges out ahead of it, a little bit of an inflow notch. And if you look at the velocity product, this whole line has damaging winds. You can see where the reds are meeting the green the whole way, so damaging winds with the line. But you can see this little area where the reds and the greens come straight together, and that's what we call gate-to-gate rotation, and that's where we had the tornado develop. This is another good one. Same storm in Darke County. There are actually 2 areas of rotation, and this is using the terminal Doppler at the Dayton airport. So it's a little bit closer, a little bit easier to see. You can see those greens meeting the reds where that tornado touchdown. And then also pretty much right over the sheriff's office, you can see the greens and the reds that came together in a second area.
Question.
Yes.
With all the radar you talked about here in the last half an hour, are satellites any aid at all?
Yes. Not in real-time forecast, not in like severe weather mode. More what we use satellite for is to see where storms are developing, because we can see outflow boundaries, we can see where there's starting to be cumulus form. And then looking at the actual overall pattern of where like larger storm systems are, but like the day of when severe weather is actually occurring, no. Typically they're not used. Like I said, pretty much rely on radar and spotters at that point. And this is a perfect example. This is when the storm was maxed out in intensity in central Ohio west of Columbus. You have this bright green out ahead of the squall line, the red behind the squall line, but you get a little loop back here embedded behind the main area of the squall line within the precipitation. So it's not even out ahead of it, it's behind it. But you get a real tight couplet of these reds meeting the greens, which is called gate-to-gate rotation, and an EF1 tornado, almost EF2 tornado, dropped down just north of Kirkwoodville. Any questions before I go on to the next one? So pretty much in October, it was widespread damaging wind threat, had a lot of directional shear with some embedded tornadoes. Second example, May 25th, 2011, is just the opposite. A perfect day, perfect setup for supercells, good setup for long-lived tornadoes and the potential for a squall line, but our main focus on this past May was the threat for violent tornadoes, and the Storm Prediction Center, another day 2 moderate risk, started forecasting long-lived and violent tornadoes on the day 2 outlook. Day 1 outlook, we get another rare high risk. East Central Indiana here in Muncie, we're under a moderate risk. Indianapolis southwestward is under a high risk for severe weather, including violent tornadoes, long track tornadoes. And this was the outcome. Most people don't know this, but we actually had more tornadoes in Indiana on May 25th, 2011 than we have ever had on another day in record. We had 32 tornadoes touch down, which was one more than what we had back in the outbreak of April of 1974. Most of them were embedded within a squall line later that night. There were some long track tornadoes early on in the afternoon. And this was a busy day. It started in the morning, about 10:30. We had the first wave of severe thunderstorms and tornado warnings move through northern Indiana, a second wave in the afternoon, and a third squall line in the evening. And to show you, just to demonstrate how active this day was, Howard County and Kokomo were under tornado warning 7 times on May 25th. So we have the high risk of severe weather, the rare high risk.
I have a question.
Yeah.
This is my first exposure to this. So if I'm sitting at home, where do I go to see a radar to pull out the red and green screens to look at the direction of the wind and so forth?
If you go to Weather Underground, wunderground.com, they have a pretty good free radar that has velocity products, which is the winds, the red and the greens.
And which radars did you need to look at on that when you go there?
It's any radar, like you could just click on which one, like the Indianapolis radar,
Well, I'm familiar with.
and then you click, and it's called storm relative velocity. Storm relative velocity
Oh, okay.
is what it's called, and that'll show you the winds. And let's take a 2-minute break real quick because my work's calling me. So, in the actual meso of the storm, and to our east, we had a half-mile wide Gusnados. We're like, okay, which way do we go?
Yeah. Well, we saw a video where the Gusnado actually picked up cars and threw them across the road. Was that a video? Something?
Well, they can be powerful, so.
It was the Skywarn class in Randolphtown. Yeah.
And typically, the National Weather Service, if they get reports of a Gusnado, even though it's not a true tornado, 9 out of 10 times I've seen them issue tornado warnings. Better be safe than sorry. So.
We didn't know what it was, man, but there was debris, there's power flashes, but man, it was.
But it was just on the ground. I mean, there wasn't nothing.
We couldn't see anything in between.
Yep. Yeah. Okay, I think we're going to go ahead and get started. We got a couple more slides to go through, and then I'll take any questions. Like I said, if there's anything that I can focus on or answer for you, I know we're covering a lot of information in a short amount of time. Our goal with Delaware County Skywarn And actually, for everybody who's here, if you want to attend, we're gonna, I think Lucas and I are gonna talk and hopefully try to start having like quarterly meetings where we meet once every 3 months, go over any questions that anybody has, provide some education a couple times a year, because obviously, outside the National Weather Service class, there's not a whole lot of opportunity to learn about additional spotter techniques and forecasting techniques. So something we're looking at, we'll keep everybody posted on that. But real quick, getting back to the slides, back to May 25th, high risk day. Good threat for violent tornadoes. And this is, like I said, these are just some of the tools we use as meteorologists and forecasters, but this is what we call our short-range ensemble forecast, and it takes a lot of forecast models and comes up with probabilities of things happening. So on a scale of 0 to 100%, we have a 50% chance of violent tornadoes by the SREF in central Indiana today. I don't know about Lucas, but anytime I get anything over 30 that I see on the forecast models, I start to perk up a little bit. So when we get a 50 that's right across central Indiana, we start to sound the red flags, because chances are there's going to be a good threat for a tornado outbreak. Nice curvature in the hotographs, which is just the way the winds are in the upper layers of the atmosphere. Back southeasterly winds, which means that there's a nice inflow into the storm, has a good chance to rotate good warm air. And then the satellite image, you have your low pressure system out in Kansas and Missouri, spinning with precipitation and thunderstorms out ahead of it along the warm front. And that's one of the key things that we look for on severe weather days, on active tornado days, is where's the warm front at? Because if a storm can become rooted on a warm front, it rides that boundary, the chances of it producing a tornado automatically go way up, because you have that cold air and that warm air right there together and storms start rotating. Case in point, May 25th. Here's your boundary right across central Indiana, your cold front, your low pressure system, multiple rounds of severe thunderstorms, and the day starts off extremely early. I was working that morning for a couple hours. We were going to go out and chase. I'm sitting in my office at work. 9:30, we start getting tornado warnings in Indiana. I'm like, okay, it's time to move. Northwestern Indiana, trained weather spotters reported a tornado on the ground. 9:25 in the morning, just to show that tornadoes can happen at any time of the day. National Weather Service confirms an EF1 tornado in their storm survey, touchdown due to that thunderstorm. Tornado watch is issued for all of central Indiana. This is the first of many tornado watches that day. It goes from 9:50 a.m. until 7 o'clock p.m. And then it gets reissued at 7 o'clock p.m. and goes until 2 a.m. But the big difference is the first one's a regular tornado watch. Second one, particularly dangerous situation tornado watch. Very rare in Indiana. Happens more times than not in the plains. So we're under a PDS tornado watch, meaning that the atmosphere is extremely favorable for severe thunderstorms capable of producing not only tornadoes, but long-lived violent tornadoes. We're out with SWAT chasing that day. First severe thunderstorm of the day starts cranking up southwest of Columbus. Severe thunderstorm warning. We're sitting in Columbus, and this is what we see. A well-defined rotating wall cloud. Immediately we call the National Weather Service. Already watching radar, so we see that it's starting to hook out. We start to get that hook echo, which I'll show you what that means, what that looks like if you don't already know. And we're getting rotation on radar. Radar image, this is when we're still under severe thunderstorm warning. You have your hook starting to form. Basically what that means is that you have some type of precipitation-free base somewhere in that thunderstorm, which is right here. You're getting rotation occurring, and the precipitation starting to wrap all the way around it. If you see a hook, 7 out of 10 times, there's a good chance it's a rotating thunderstorm. It's not always the case, but more times than not. And you have your dummy indicator here on the Gibson Ridge products telling you, hey, look at me, I'm rotating. We call the National Weather Service. They're watching our live video. Tornado warning issued. Columbus, including Greensburg, and this storm continues to display an inflow notch and hook echo. Just to show you how busy this day was, this was early afternoon. We already have thunderstorms that are tornado warned, severe thunderstorm warned, and the round from the mornings in northwestern Ohio already producing a round of severe thunderstorms and tornadoes. Greensburg, thunderstorm in Columbus, get the tornado warning on it, moves to the northeast, Greensburg takes a direct hit. You can see that after the storm passes Greensburg, we still have gate-to-gate rotation. And there you can see the inflow notch on radar for basically the storm's wrapping around itself. And this is kind of some of the damage pictures. We happen to roll up right behind the thunderstorm in Greensburg, right behind the tornado, and there's a lot of damage. Round 2. This isn't our picture. This is a picture off of Wish TV. But thunderstorms continue to develop over and over again in the same areas. More thunderstorms develop to the southwest. We get not radar indicated, but trained weather spotters reported a funnel cloud near Bedford. Funnel cloud on a day like today, National Weather Service gets a report of a funnel cloud. They know that the atmosphere is about as volatile as it gets. A tornado warning is going to get issued. They're not even going to question it. Sure enough, we get an EF2 tornado touchdown, and that's the actual picture as it's developing just west of Bedford. And this is about as good of an example of gate-to-gate rotation as I can give you. This is a supercell in Lawrence County, Bedford EF2 tornado. You have 80 knot outbound winds, 80 knot inbound winds. You get the red and the green that basically look like a Christmas tree coming right together. And when you get that signature on radar, when these reds are meeting these greens and it's that clear, the chances of a tornado on the ground are extremely high. This is when the thunderstorm's first developing back here near Bedford, starting to get some reports of a rotation. Tornado warnings starting to go up with other storms. And you can almost see on radar, days that you have high-risk days that the atmosphere is that volatile, there's that much shear. Every single storm on radar looks like it's hooking. That's because it probably is. Every single storm probably has some type of rotation. So you start looking at them, every single one of them starts bending back, and almost every storm that day exhibited some type of rotation. Also notice that we have the cold front back here, starting to get a squall line develop around number 3 on the cold front. That's ultimately what caused the tornado warnings here in Delaware County to get issued 11:45 midnight that night. Just to show you how massive the storm system was, here's your high risk tornado watches that go from portions of Michigan all the way to Texas. PDS tornado watches Ohio, Illinois, Missouri, Indiana. And then round after round of thunderstorms on the warm front and then back on the cold front in Missouri. Round 3, the squall line. Almost every county in the state on May 25th was under a tornado warning at one time or the other. There's only 6 counties in the entire state that were not under a tornado warning. And that includes a couple counties in the far northwestern portions of the state and a couple counties down here by Cincinnati. Storms in Cincinnati probably should have had tornado warnings, but we're talking about the Wilmington National Weather Service office. And I digress. Perfect radar image. This is beautiful of a squall line. You can see the bow here, and it basically looks like a snake. You have your bow here, your rear inflow jet cutting into the storm. It bows back out in Illinois, and then you get another bow into Illinois, in southern Illinois. And I mean, it is probably one of the best examples of a squall line I think I've ever seen. National Weather Service tornado warnings, the entire line of the thunderstorms, because the atmosphere is so volatile, the squall line not only capable of producing damaging winds, but tornadoes. And they continue tornado warning the line as it moves to the northeast. And Delaware County and Randolph County also got issued under that tornado warning. And that is all I have. But I will be more than happy to answer any questions that anyone might have, because I know I covered a lot. Anybody? Sorry, I'm losing my voice. I dispatched all day since 1 a.m. Yes, ma'am.
I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about shear. We heard it a little bit earlier.
Shear is basically one of the things. It's one of the main indicators you have to have for tornado development. And as a meteorologist, if you have, typically the months that we get the most shear is when we have large low pressure systems or large weather systems developing. And that happens in the spring, and in the fall. Because for a weather system to become strong and to develop, you have to have temperature clash. You have to have enough lift, which is caused by that temperature clash. So generally, June, July, August, we're dealing with thunderstorms with lots of instability, lots of moisture, lots of heat, no wind shear, because the weather systems tend to be weaker because there's not anything to help them strengthen. So that's why typically in the summer months you don't see big tornado outbreaks in Indiana. You don't see those long-lived tornadoes typically, not always, but 9 out of 10 times June, July, August. Our main weather systems, or our main severe weather outbreaks occur in the spring, March, April, and May, and then again in the fall, late August, September, October. But wind shear basically is the changing of the winds in the atmosphere. You have winds in the lower layers of the atmosphere going one direction, different direction in the upper layers of the atmosphere. Or you have shear that's going in one direction all the way through the atmosphere, and that's when we have the damaging winds. If there's no change in wind shear in the atmosphere, you have damaging wind potential. When you start getting the winds going in different directions, that's when you have the potential for tornadoes. Anybody else have any other questions? Real quick, show you guys a couple pictures that these are from the reservoir. I don't even know the guy's name that gave it to me. Yeah. But these are kind of, some very ominous clouds, some low scud. Just FYI, if you don't know what scud is, basically it's clouds developing on the moist, warm air that's feeding into the storm. While it looks ominous, scud typically is just no more than lowered clouds that are feeding into the parent thunderstorm. The one thing you need to know though is that anytime you get scud in front of a thunderstorm, or you see scud, that's a sign that the thunderstorm is ingesting warm air. It's a sign that the thunderstorm is strengthening, and typically a sign that somewhere in the atmosphere the storm's rotating. So if you see scud, chances that the thunderstorm is pretty strong or severe is very high. These are just some of the pictures that he provided me, and I kind of figured I'd get through some of them. Just because of the fact that it shows how ominous some of the scud and some of the cloud features can be, but unless it's rotating, unless you have a tornado on the ground, that's hard to tell exactly what it is. It might be a wall cloud, might just be some scud, a low cloud, but you have to know what you're reporting, kind of like Lucas said. So, no questions I can answer about radar or anything, besides the fact that I think I filled everybody up with enough knowledge for one night. Okay. Like I said, we're going to work on organizing maybe some quarterly meetings, maybe once every 3 or 4 months, just to come in, talk about changes in the National Weather Service, changes in the warning process, go over some brief training, radar training, severe weather forecasting training, spotting training, and just go over any issues that might have arisen in the past 3 or 4 months in Delaware County Skywarn. So that's something that we're working on, and we will keep everyone posted on that. The best way for us to communicate, and I was thinking about this earlier, is probably Facebook. And then we might try to maybe create like a Delaware County Skywarn group on Facebook. But at this point, that's still in the organizational process. So, join ham radio, amateur radio. We meet, MCOM, ECI meets the first Saturday of every month, which happens to be this Saturday. I'm at 10 a.m. at the Yorktown Fire Department, so if anybody's interested, feel free to come out and see what our meetings are like, and by all means join if you have interest in that. We're always looking for new members. So, okay, well, I appreciate everybody coming out. Like I said, if there's any questions you have afterwards, I'll be around for a little bit. So Lucas will be. Thanks again.
Thanks, guys.
Community Focus would like to thank the following underwriters for their help and support. Hometown Outdoor Advertising Incorporated, Muncie, Indiana. Put your business up for everyone to see. Wishbone Gifts Incorporated, corner of Walnut and Jackson Street in Muncie, Indiana. Best Built Computers, more than 25 years of computer repair experience. 413 South Tillotson Avenue, Suite 1, 765-216-6701 or 765-216-6041. Muncie Crime Stoppers. If you see something, say something. Elm Ridge Funeral Home and Memorial Park, 4600 West Kilgore Avenue, Muncie, Indiana. 765-288-5061. Visit our website, www.elmridgefuneralhome.com. We also offer certified celebrants. Tim Clevenger, Heating and Cooling, 288-2773, 2713 East Jackson Street, Muncie. Community Focus is produced by Millennium Productions.